The dunes are a mysterious place. They change with the tide and the wind, never staying the same for long. And in the summer of 1974 in Provincetown, Massachusetts, the dunes revealed a mystery. A woman's mutilated body, found posed on a beach blanket. Her identification, her hands, and her name were all taken by her killer. For decades, she was only known as the Lady in the Dunes. But now, after all these years, her story is finally being revealed. Thanks for watching True Crime Recaps. I'm Chris. A 12-year-old girl and her parents were hiking with their dogs when they stumbled on a dead woman. The young woman was lying face down on a green beach blanket tucked away in the scrub brush. She must have been there a while because her naked body was already decomposing. Her hands were missing, some of her teeth had been yanked out, and someone had almost taken off her head. But they could still see the pink polished toenails and her long auburn ponytail, and just underneath her head peeked a pair of folded Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana. For decades, those were the only clues police had. Her name and her story seemed to be lost forever. Then, in 2022, DNA came through with her name, Ruth Marie Terry. She was 37 years old, originally from a little town near Chattanooga, Tennessee. She ventured away from home in the early 70s and struck out to see the world. In 1974, a blow to the head with one of those folding shovels, what they call a military entrenching tool, took her life, maybe as long as 3 weeks before she was found on July 26th. For some reason, her killer went to a lot of trouble to make sure all traces of her identity and himself were removed. He took her hands and one forearm, as well as several teeth. Where it all happened, they don't know. There wasn't a lot of blood found on the scene, so she was most likely laid out on that beach blanket after. But no one in the area could recall seeing her around. In 2010, her body was exhumed and clay composites were made to reconstruct her face, hoping someone in the world might recognize her. But no one did. Not that there weren't theories, of course. The weirdest one came from Stephen King's son, author Joe Hill. He knew about the Lady in the Dunes case. He was fascinated by it, really. And in 2015, he found himself in a theater watching a 40th anniversary showing of Jaws. You might not know this, but Jaws was filmed in Martha's Vineyard in the summer of 1974, right around the same time that the Lady of the Dunes appeared in Provincetown, 100 miles away from the production. So, what does that have to do with Jaws? Because of what Joe thought he saw a little more than halfway through the movie. One of the background actors made his own jaw drop. It was a 30-something woman with the face of the composite photo he knew so well. Her hair was tied up with a blue bandana and she wore jeans. Could he be looking at the Lady in the Dunes alive and well in her last moments on Earth? Hold that thought. Because investigators released a second name in the case, Guy Muldavin, a charismatic 51-year-old antiques dealer and Ruth Marie Terry's husband of only a few months. The two of them were married in February 1974. It was her first marriage and his fourth. In 1960, his second wife and her daughter were brutally murdered in Seattle, Washington, not long after he left them for his third wife. He was arrested, but fled to New York City, where he was arrested again for unlawful flight to avoid giving testimony relating to mutilation of human remains, according to a statement the FBI gave the Associated Press. Around the same time, he was facing charges for conning $10,000 out of his third wife's stepmother. Apparently, he told them he needed to buy antiques in Canada before he ran away with the money to New York. In 1961, he was convicted for larceny, but his sentence was suspended in 1962, and he was ordered to repay the money. In 1960, the Madera Tribune reported he was, quote, schooled in Switzerland, New York, and Connecticut, as well as tutored privately on his family cattle ranch at Ribera, New Mexico. His family may have also owned property in Provincetown at one time. That might be the reason Guy and Ruth ended up there in 1974. If he was actually with her in Cape Cod, that is. He popped up again in the papers in 1985, but not in connection with murder. This time, his public access radio show was the focus of the article. This is such an unbelievable twist. Every week, Guy Muldavin volunteered to host a 3-hour call-in show titled Talk to me. It was all about aging, growing, and making transitions, according to the Californian. In the article, he claims he went through a major life change 9 years earlier. Now, if we do that math, that would be in 1976, 2 years after poor Ruth was left mutilated on a beach blanket on the other side of the country. Guy told the reporter he decided to retire from his job as an executive VP of a china, crystal, and silver store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. After he turned in his walking papers, he wrote a cookbook called Cooking with Rump Oil, and it's very disturbing. One recipe published in the New York Times is for Cape Cod shid. It says, quote, out of the water and into the pan. The sweet turpentine taste will turn to that of a blunt glove, and the tender look will become one of despair. He also did some work with at-risk youths through the Santa Monica Police Department. The Californian article also said he introduced programs dealing with homosexuality, the erosion of culture, and his belief that killing has become a habit. Although they didn't elaborate on what was meant by programs or that killing has become a habit. Unfortunately, Guy can't tell us himself because he died in California in 2002, leaving behind a fifth wife and a sister, according to his obituary. As for Ruth, she left plenty of loved ones behind. She got pregnant as a teenager and gave her son up for adoption. He got curious about his birth mother and added his DNA to Ancestry.com, wondering if it might help him find her. And it did, just not the way he would have expected. Ancestry led him to Ruth's extended family, and Cape Cod investigators used genealogy DNA to track down her family around the same time. According to NBC Boston, the last time they saw Ruth was a few months before her body was discovered. They thought she was in California with Guy Muldavin, who they had met, although they didn't know he went by a few other names, including Raoul Rockwell, and they definitely didn't know about his checkered past. They do remember that he seemed very controlling of Ruth, and she wasn't her typical loving, free-spirited self when he was around. And it was him who told them that she was missing all those years ago. They went to California to search for her since that's the last place they knew she was. But a private investigator they hired told them all her things had been sold and she left the state to parts unknown. Of course, now we know she ended up in the sands of Cape Cod. Thanks to those investigators, she finally got her name back, and her biological son helped as well. They used his DNA to confirm her identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. If investigators can prove her husband, Guy Muldavin, was also her killer, then she'll get justice too. But what about Joe Hill's theory about the extra in Jaws? Was she Ruth Marie Terry? Well, maybe. The movie screenwriter Carl Gottlieb heard about it and checked his old production schedule. He got some good news, bad news answers. The good news was that the timing fit. The extra is in scene 130, about 54 minutes into the movie. It's a big crowd scene with a bunch of people getting onto a ferry. The bad news is that all those people weren't accounted for as hired extras. They were mostly just summer tourists actually boarding a ferry. Productions put up signs to let people know they're filming in that area and you might be part of a scene. Maybe you've seen those signs. That's what happened here. So there's no record of her name. Joe Hill, for one, is still speculating. Could it be her? What could have brought Ruth to Cape Cod that summer? Was her husband with her, or was she running from something? Something that ultimately killed her. What do you think?
And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.